This is the Go Radio Business Show.
So, Willie, a bit of a more serious show this week.
Yes.
As you know, we've, at the Hunter Foundation, we've been looking at ways to help Scotland. You know, I don't think there's any more proud Scots than you and me.
Yep.
You know, we're so proud that Scotland invented the modern world, and as we always say, not our words, but Professor Arthur Herman of Georgetown University.
Who's an American?
Who's an American. So sometimes, as Robert Burns says, to see ourselves as others see us. You know, Scotland gave the world the phone, the TV, penicillin. We led the world in education. Glasgow was the second city of the empire.
Yep.
But not anymore.
Unfortunately not.
And that's what I'm really worried about, Willie. Not anymore. So when we were looking, and we got Oxford Economics to do the piece on Ireland a couple of years ago, and we're launching this today with Go Radio, they've looked at Singapore, because you were in Singapore phoning me saying, Tam, you've got to see this. And I've never been. You've got an office there. And they've did their report.
Yeah.
But I had it's a kind of, let's just call it State of the Union address.
Yeah.
That's not political either. But let's look at where Scotland is today. So on our education, we once led the world. We were once the envy of the world. In our secondary school education, there's a worldwide study called the PISA study. We have been falling down the rankings for the past 10 years in maths, in science, in reading and writing. So we used to lead England by a great margin. Not that England's a gold standard either, Willie, but we're now below England. Mm-hmm. On our NHS, we're all proud of the NHS. We're all users of the NHS. But in the NHS, Willie, we've got some of the worst health outcomes for Scottish people in the world. We are number one in the world for heart disease. Yeah. And our NHS is seeing less patients than it did before COVID.
Yep.
And on the things you and I really know about, the economy, I would say the Scottish economy has been in managed decline for the past 10 to 15 years.
I would agree.
So therefore, you and I talk about it when we're not doing the show, and I've become really worried about where we are. We've got a Scottish election in May 26, and the whole purpose of doing this, it's not to criticise, it's not to be political, it's to say, where are the big ideas for Scotland? Who has the big ideas? Who's coming forward with the big ideas? How can we make Scotland great again? Yeah. And that's not political either.
No. We need to get our hats.
And therefore, we got Oxford Economics to look at Singapore. And you know more than Singapore than I do. But the thing that really struck me, and it's available to download for free in the Hunter Foundation's website, but the thing that really struck me, Willie, was first of all, leadership. Yeah. Lee Kuan Yew, a hero of yours and now a hero of mine. Yeah. You know, because Singapore had been through political upheaval. It'd come out of being part of one country, and it was a poverty.
It was one of the poorest places on earth.
One of the poorest places on earth. And through leadership and a vision, and an execution of that vision, Lee Kuan Yew made Singapore almost number one in the world per capita for GDP, one of the best education systems in the world, one of the best healthcare systems in the world, one of the best housing systems in the world.
Yeah.
So therefore, that's why we looked at Singapore to say, what can Scotland learn from this? Yeah. So leadership is my number one thing.
Yep.
And I know you know the answer to this, but for the viewers and the listeners, in Singapore, they pay their Prime Minister $2.2 million per year. We pay our First Minister £165,000. We want the best people running our country. It's the hardest job. I'll let you decide if we have the right people running our country. Well, you're smiling.
Yeah. I think that obviously when I came back from Singapore, I actually phoned you from Singapore and says, look, we have to look at this model, right? Because it works. And in 60 years, they've completely turned the whole country around. It's unbelievable. And the similarities between the two countries, right, are uncanny. We're nearly the same size, 5.5, 6 million people. Okay, their density is much, much more, right? But how they've turned the whole thing around, and I think the point that you're making is that over the last year or so, a couple of years on this programme, we have looked at the global economics, we have looked at UK economics, but we've now said, you know what, we need to focus on Scottish economics. And I think when I read this report, fantastic, 31 pages, right? I read every bit of it. And one of the things that you were going to touch on, which again is at the heart of this again, and it's very, I mean, this week it's the top topic, is housing.
Housing.
Right, and what they've done in Singapore in relation to housing. But I have to say to the viewers, the listeners, all the things that you mentioned there, healthcare, education, everything in Singapore is better. None of it is free. None of it is free.
No.
Right. So what we need is, you made the point about all the great, the Scots who invented the world, Arthur Herman, the Enlightenment. Tom, what we need is, we need a leadership that's got a big vision for Scotland. And that big vision should be easily, and it's encapsulated in what you've just said, it is time for Enlightenment 2.
Yep.
100%. Let us all the clever people step up to the plate, no matter what your politics are, because here's the bottom line. All this tinkering and tweaking ain't going to get us anywhere.
No.
We need a revolution. We need something radical. We need this stirred up, because every single authority in Scotland is just about bankrupt.
Yep.
Right? They're telling us that. So our services are getting worse and worse, and they want to put up our costs by 10%, 15% in one of the central local authorities. This is not sustainable. This is not sustainable. We mentioned it last week. Nobody is happy with a lot at the moment.
No.
And we need to come up with a vision, and we've said it. This should all be built round the opportunity where Scotland could become the lead on clean energy. Right, was it said that the new Saudi Arabia, I know that we want to be called that, but if we have an opportunity, sometimes when you have a crisis, you don't have a solution. We've actually got a solution.
I think there are
solutions. You listened to Keith Anderson yesterday and what he's got to say about what they're doing with clean energy. That should be the number one focus, and everything else will fall into place. That and housing. 100 experts have told us this week that the economic decline in Scotland over the last 10 years is absolutely, there's a correlation between that and the lack of housing. So for us to hear today on the anniversary of the housing emergency, things are worse. So to everybody watching this, who's accountable? Who is it within the government who has done nothing to help this problem that's actually got worse?
And just to make it clear to the viewers and listeners, a year ago, almost to the day, the Scottish Government declared a housing emergency because 4 local authorities had done it.
Yes.
And a year on, there's less houses being built in Scotland.
Yeah.
And if that was a business, Willie, somebody would be fired.
Yes.
Because, and you have looked at the housing market, you've dissected every piece of the supply chain, you've taken your own time, your own money, you've put it in there, and you've said, right, looking at everything that could be done to improve the housing situation in Scotland.
Yeah.
So you have got some of these answers. It doesn't need Westminster, it could happen tomorrow.
Yes.
And yet, people have maybe listened to you, but the same as me, they've ignored you.
100%.
Why do you think that is?
I actually think that we said it in the previous weeks, the Deputy First Minister, Kate Forbes, to be fair to her, has been engaged, right? Yep. And I would say to you, and I think that she would like to do something about it tomorrow. The problem you've got is, you've got the civil service, right? You've got the red tape. You've got all of this is the rules. Nobody is willing to change the rules, right? And someone has to change. It's interesting today. We've got Willie Watt on the show today, Willie at SNIB. I think could be at the heart. You've been saying to me for months and months and months, you've got a solution. This is one thing where I would say, if you wanted to put my neck on the block, 100% I could fix the housing problem.
There you go.
But unfortunately, I need to deliver the houses, right? But 100%, this is something that can be fixed. And it's not all about throwing more and more money at it.
No, it's not, because I speak to people, huge investors, global investors, who would do the build to rent sector, Willie.
Yeah.
And as you know, these people are investing for 30 years. What do these investors need, Willie? They need stability. They need to know that the housing policy is not going to flip-flop. In Scotland, there was 200 million out the affordable housing. Oh no, it's back in.
Yeah.
Oh, there's a rent cap. Oh no, it's off. Oh no, it's back on. People don't know where they stand.
Yeah.
If they did one thing, if the government did one thing on Monday morning, this Monday morning, and they said, okay, the solution to the housing crisis in Scotland is build more houses.
Yes.
I mean, honestly,
Yeah.
it's that simple. And there is hundreds of millions of pounds not getting invested in Scotland today because they don't know the policy. Get the policy. Even if the rent cap was said, right, it's going to be no more than X, investors can get their head around about it, but it's got to stay there. As long as it allows them to make a return, they will then invest in Scotland. It will release hundreds of millions of pounds of investment.
You're running a business. You've got a priority, which is your number one problem. The UK government gives you 5.4 billion extra, which you were not expecting. What would you have spent a big chunk of that on? Fixing your biggest problem. And it didn't happen.
But every economy that I know of, housing is at the heart of that. Well,
Yes.
housing's at the heart of it.
Yeah.
As you know. So, yes, we're being critical this morning, but this is also what we're saying to the Scottish Government this morning. Willie and I are willing to put our time, money and effort into helping you find solutions for this. Let's get together. I'm available Monday.
Yeah.
Let's get on with it. Willie has looked at this. He understands what's going on. Why are you not ringing our phones?
I also would like to add to that. It's easy to blame the civil service, right? We need to help them. If they tell us it's because of the rules and the regulations, then we need to look at that and help them as to how we can change that, right? So maybe their hands are tied behind their back as well. But I've got to say to you, in my experience over the last couple of years of trying to get somewhere with this, I am getting to the end of my tether.
And once you get to the end of your tether, we all better worry about that. But we have defined the problem.
Yeah.
But we've also defined a solution.
Yeah.
Because, you know, when people come to my office, they can't just come and moan.
Correct.
So I can't just moan. So we want Scotland to flourish.
Yeah.
You want Scotland to flourish. I want Scotland to flourish. So my next topic, and a learning from Singapore, is tax.
Yeah.
So tax is something which Ireland used to grow their economy.
Yep.
Remember, they've got a 30 billion euro surplus.
Yeah.
We've got a 30 billion deficit.
Yeah.
And Singapore, again, used tax.
Yeah.
So the first thing the government will say, oh, that's not in our gift.
Yeah.
Which is correct. But what is in the government's gift, Willie, is they've put up income tax for the highest earners, three pence more than England.
Yeah.
Now you think, well, 3 pence, what does it matter? Well, it does matter, because the companies with the best talent win. When you're growing a business, you're in the talent business. You want to attract and retain the best talent. Yeah. And if somebody who I'm trying to get has got a job offer from Manchester, they say, okay, right, I'll offer you the same. Oh no, Tom, you need to offer me more because I'm paying more tax in Scotland. Yeah. And I have not saw any data that tells me that that policy is bringing in more money for the economy. Why not go 1 penny below the rest of the UK? It's symbolic. I don't think it's going to be earth-shattering, but it takes away the argument that we're a high tax economy. And, you know, a radical solution to this, and it would need Westminster's approval. Yeah, why don't we go to Westminster and say, let's make the whole of Scotland an enterprise zone?
Which we've been saying for months and months.
Why don't we do that? And therefore, let's look at the transition from hydrocarbons to renewables, and let's make it Scotland the best place in the world to do that.
And I would say to you, I would agree with that 100%. And I've always said that I've never felt being held back being part of the UK. But if we go down there with absolute 100% guaranteed solutions and they say no, then I would be saying to the people running Scotland, it's time to ask for fiscal autonomy for Scotland.
Wow. Well, that's a big...
If I felt that the UK was holding me back, then I would be asking for fiscal autonomy where we could do all the things that you've just said. And I think with that, if we were allowed to do that, we could do, at the moment you've said that we can't do the things that, you know, we've got a bit of leeway with tax, 3% either way, up or down, but we always use it the wrong way, we put it the wrong way.
Yep.
And what we're saying is to everybody out there, we mentioned it last week, see this, the answer is tax the rich, feed the poor. It's the big group in the middle. It's that 60% of the people who are on 30 grand to 70 grand who are all feeling it the worst at the moment. And again, we're not just talking about a housing crisis for more houses. What we're talking about in our housing model would actually help people with the cost of living crisis.
Yes.
People would be better off, much better off. And then if we get clean energy, then that's another great, you know, that was something that would cheer people up. At the moment, it's too gloomy. And I think that what we need here is, it's time for that revolution we've been talking about.
So I have never heard so much disquiet, Willie, amongst business owners, people who are up early in the morning, who are out there striving, you know, and this is like electricians, plumbers, brickies, you know, self-employed people who are working hard, and they're saying, you know, we're getting not a bad rate, but all this tax comes off here, and we're just, you know, what are we left with at the end of the day?
Yeah.
And as you know, we run the scale-up programs, and I've never heard so many people who are going, my goodness, you know, will we go and base our business in Singapore or Dubai or Monaco? And I'm saying, no, let's do it in Scotland. That's how we fund, you know, and the government always say, oh, well, those with the broadest shoulders carry the heaviest burden.
Yeah.
Well, we do. 11% of the top taxpayers in Scotland pay 65% of the tax. So the top taxpayers are sharing the heaviest burden, and we're happy to do so. This isn't about a tax cut for me and you.
No chance.
This is about stimulating enterprise. This is about saying, if you want to grow your business, come to Scotland. We have got, tax is just one thing in our armoury, but it's a big thing. Now, fiscal autonomy, you and I spoke about it. I didn't know too much about it. I've now looked at it. It works in Canada. Mm-hmm. It works in Germany. It works in Switzerland, where the cantons have their own tax. And it works within a federal state. Mm. So what we're saying this morning on the Go Radio Business Show, if we're looking for a big, bold ideas for Scotland, what Willie's saying, and I'm agreeing with, is let's look at fiscal autonomy for Scotland.
If the UK keeps saying no.
If the UK keeps saying no. But I would say, how do we get these extra powers is when we prove we've got competent government in Scotland. Correct. And I'm afraid, given where our education, our health service, our economy, the housing, we haven't shown competent government for some time, Willie.
You're right. And for me, people would see this as politics. It's not. We've been praising people, no
Yeah.
matter which government, who's running the government. We will praise them when praise is due. But at the moment, unfortunately, the headlines all of this week was something that we've been majoring on, and housing is not good at all. When people are calling for ministers to be sacked and nothing happening, I don't think that John Swinney can be happy with the last 3 days that he's had with the headlines about housing.
So let's go back to leadership, Willie, because it's one of the big things coming out of Singapore.
Yeah.
Lee Kuan Yew, and everybody can look him up.
Yeah.
And, you know, there may be some criticism he was authoritarian, but, you know, to get things done and to take a country from abject poverty to be one of the highest per capita GDPs in the world, it's not an easy job. So how would you say, it's really struck me that when people come into politics, there is a trusted route. They probably go to, I'm talking about leadership here, they probably go to Oxford and they study PPE, not the stuff for COVID.
Yes, yes.
And then they get a job as a researcher, and then they go up, and all of a sudden they're running the country.
Yeah.
Now that in business would not be a model for which any of us would train our leaders. And I was taken by Tony Blair's book on leadership, where he said when he came to power, he had no idea how to govern. He was pretty good at the politics,
Yep.
but he had no idea how to govern, and he had to learn on the job.
Yeah.
And I look at what's happening in Scotland, and this, I'm not going to personalise the criticism. I don't think it gets us anywhere. But running Scotland must be the hardest job in Scotland.
Yeah.
Running the NHS in Scotland must be the second hardest job in Scotland. And how do we attract the people now? Singapore is paying $2.2 million. So wages is one thing. But what do you think we need to do to attract better people into running our country?
So if you study the model of Singapore since 1966, since it became independent, the one thing it's at the heart of that is longevity. It was a long-term plan. And people may criticise it and say it was a dictatorship. It wasn't a democracy. It was a dictatorship with a velvet glove, right? He took everybody with him. There is not one person think that they were dragged. And that we've mentioned it before. What was the big things that he'd done? One, when the GDP was $1,200, right, per head of capita, then they decided the number one language in schools would be English.
English.
Right? And
but
then
you got a lot of
flat
pushback.
100%, right. But the things that they do, look at to just touch on some of the things here that are really interesting. We've had a lot of stuff this week about migration.
Yes.
Right. The rules in Singapore are 66% of the population are indigenous, right? So they get everything.
Right.
The other 13% that have got long time visas to get there, they get 50%. This is help for the government.
Right.
And people who are not in those two categories get nothing. Right, but there is a way that you can get jobs and they will help you and they'll work. But what they do is so instead of saying people can't get in, so you can come in if you want to work hard, if you want to do something, want to do better, you're welcome. But what you don't get is handouts. And that's the great thing about the Singaporean system. Nothing is a handout. Nothing, even for the people who are working and working hard. So in those 60 years, Lee Kuan Yew took the GDP per head capita from $1,200 to $99,000.
Wow.
Right. So if you compare Scotland at the moment with Singapore, we're at 57,000 and they're at 99,000. So that'd be like us doubling our output by the amount of people that live in the country. But when you look at all the stats in this report, which is when it comes out and everybody, and I would recommend to everybody, even if you're not into economics, read this report.
It's an easy read.
Because what it does is, this is a thing that will cheer you up. If we've got people who are going to take us in a path. So back to my point about longevity.
Right.
We can either do one or two things. Because of the way the voting system works in Scotland, it was designed that nobody would ever have a majority. Right. The way things are at the moment, and people get so upset with people, somebody actually might get a majority, right? The way it might work. So if you wanted to do it in Singapore, you'd need 20 years. Right? You'd need 20 years.
But you've got to start something.
Yeah, but what you could do is, then if you feel as if you're going to change government every 5 years, somehow or other find a way of taking economic growth and it not being a political football.
Okay.
Right, lay down something that people could adopt if it changes government, or you've got longevity, you've got a second term where you can easily take that on, because you absolutely need that. But to be fair, I believe any political leader having a wherewithal about them to say, you know what, this is what we want to do, I'll guarantee you, they'll not need to worry about longevity. They will get voted in the next time, and they'll get voted in the time after that. If you delivered this for the people of Scotland, partly delivered it, people would be over the moon. Because in 25 years of devolution, what can we point to that's been a success? Not much.
No.
Not much at all.
So you touch on immigration, and it's another thing that Scotland's different from the rest of the UK.
Yeah.
We've got a demographic time bomb ticking away, whereas over the next 20 plus years, our ageing population, the number of 85-year-olds is going to double, and the number of people in work, if we don't have positive immigration, is going to go down. And it's the people in work that pay for the older people. And because of science and people living longer, then, you know, we need to work harder to take care of them. Therefore, we do need a separate immigration policy. Keir Starmer's got his own fights down in England, and it's a big political thing, but we are different, and we should have, I agree with Kate Forbes on this, we should have a different, and it should be for a merit-based system, Willie.
Yeah.
We need skilled people. If we're going to build all these houses that you can point that we can do, we need a skills revolution. We need apprenticeships that work. We need to train our young people.
Sure, apprenticeships, retraining, upskilling.
But you've got the answer to all that, because you've been doing it all your days.
See, we mentioned at the moment, we mentioned this before, we've got two major problems. We've got a climate change problem, right? And we've got a housing shortage. We should be able to take these two big giant negatives and make it this huge positive. Right, the jobs in the economy, everything that can come out of that. So we try to build sustainable houses on the climate change front, and we build better houses. We change the model. See, if we don't, this is not a political statement, right? The economic viability of Scotland over the next 25 years, if we do not change how we're doing at the moment, is absolutely disastrous.
So that's why I'm so worried. That's why we look around the world for the best lessons. So I think leadership, number one.
Yeah.
And I don't know the answer of how we attract, you know, the best people we can find in the world to run our country, because it's the hardest job.
Yeah.
And we got to pay them.
Mm-hmm.
We got to pay them properly.
Yes.
And I don't know how to do that, but I'm willing to sit around with people who do know and get on.
Have less of them and pay them more.
Yeah.
Right. Same right down to local authority.
Yeah.
Right. We've got a £7 billion budget for Glasgow, and we've got a group of people who are on like 20 grand a year as part-time councillors.
I mean, that's crazy.
Crazy.
So we've got to have leadership,
Yeah.
and we've got to come up with a bold vision for Scotland, which is about all of our citizens flourishing. This isn't about tax breaks for you and me. That's not what this is about. You know, we need to make Scotland the place to be. So once again, if England doesn't want the non-doms, come to Scotland.
Yes.
Come to Scotland. It's a wonderful place. Come to Scotland, invest your money, build businesses, create jobs. We should be welcoming, because the non-dom policy from Westminster, quite frankly, is a disaster.
Yeah.
You know, if we have somebody that Lakshmi Mittal, the steel tycoon, leaving Britain, people say, goodbye, good riddance. Well, I don't say that, because he is probably paying for 90,000 people's benefits.
Yeah.
And if he's gone, who's taking care of those people?
Exactly. And this is what the people have to know. And I've said it before, we should have a very simplistic half-hour political broadcast across all the parties to say, here is how the balance sheet of the country works. I think I said to you, there was a programme on a couple of years ago, and I think the headline was, How Britain is Skint. Right? And but where you'd have loved it, this professor outlined where we get all our money, where we spend it. But what he did is, rather than have a moan, he says, here's the solution. here's what we should do.
Yeah.
And I think at the moment, if we don't do something radical in Scotland,
We are
very, very soon that we are going to be cut, more tax, and never mind talking about tax the rich, you're all getting taxed, right? everybody who's at a 10% increase in their council tax, trust me, it'll be 30%, it'll be 40%, because we're only going one way, and at the same time, right, our services are worse and worse. Imagine, we're the people who gave the world tarmac and tyres, right?
Yes.
So we tarmac Adam and John Dunlop, right? And now we can't fix a pothole. Surely Jim McDonald could get 10 guys up at Strathclyde University and we could come up with a system. And see if we come up with it, we could make a fortune fixing all the potholes in the UK. So I don't know why we've not done that. That's right, it's an idea.
So here's another lesson from Singapore.
Right.
Lee Kuan Yew set out to make it business friendly.
Yeah.
Not just tax.
Yeah.
He allowed the best people in the world to come to his country.
Yeah.
We should definitely do that. The companies with the best talent win. The countries with the best talent win.
Yeah.
It's as simple as that. And if we look at planning, Willie,
yeah,
a bugbear for you and I,
yeah,
in the report, you'll see the average time to get a warehouse through planning permission in Singapore is 35 days.
yeah.
In Scotland, it's 150 days plus.
Yeah.
And if you're trying to do offshore wind, it can take up to 5 years.
Yeah.
So I really liked John Swinney come out this week in his programme for government to look at the planning. But what I'm worried about is the powers that be, oh yes, we need to change. And then the status quo just wraps itself round about and it stifles that change.
Mm-hmm.
This needs teeth, Willie, to look at the planning system. A whole system has grown up to feed the system.
Yeah.
That's why it's there now. And if we're stifling business enterprise, if we just take those two statistics, so somebody trying to build a warehouse in Scotland, it's taking 5 times longer than Singapore.
Yeah.
So that means the jobs are there 5 times less, the NIC's 5 times less, the whole multiplier effect in the economy. If we could say, no, let's get to 35 days, that's just one way, and that's within the Scottish Government's gift just now.
Yeah. I think two of the most amazing things in this report, and people should home in it, right, is one, that in the whole GDP, only 16% of that total comes from personal tax.
Yes.
Right. The huge chunk of it comes from corporation tax. So that means you've got, but the number one thing that really was amazing for this, we have said for months and months and months, back to your point, if we had, I'm calling it fiscal autonomy, if we were allowed, right, we're saying that we would love a green tax status for Scotland. And we have said that so much money would flood in here for investments. Keith Anderson saying that yesterday, right?
Yep.
But even if we made it better for tax, right, that you couldn't get moving. I could not believe in the document that the inward investment in there in some years has been 4 times the size of the GDP.
Amazing.
Right, frightening, frightening.
And, you know, as I've said many times, it's not the tax rate.
Yeah.
It's not, oh, let's put it up to 48%. It's the tax take.
Yes.
So if you've got, we want to encourage wealth creators to come to Scotland because they will create more jobs. People will pay more tax, but at a decent rate.
Yeah.
A decent rate.
Yeah.
And therefore the tax take goes up. We can invest in our NHS. We can invest in our education. We can make Scotland flourish.
Yeah. And it's interesting, you made the point earlier that right at the very start, way back in 1966, when Lee Kuan Yew had this idea about economic growth, back then, that they knew that had to be a correlation between new housing.
They did.
They knew that the housing was at the heart of what they'd done, and it helped drive the economy, all the jobs they created, everything else. I mean, in the density there, I mean, I think they've got what, like 8,300 people per square kilometre, and I think we've got 237, right?
We've got space,
we've got plenty
Willie.
of land. We've got plenty of land. But the point I'm making is that we are right about this. Give Scotland the right to, as we've said, to turn all our negatives into positives. So see the wind and rain and everything that you got in the Highlands and on the shores, whatever, let's turn these into a big giant positive. If Professor Sir Jim MacDonald is correct that Scotland could sell 75% of all the clean energy, why would we not want to be that energy powerhouse?
Why not?
Right. I think some of the other things in the document in this bit of work, which I think is fantastic. So well done to the guys at Oxford. Well done to you for commissioning it.
Well,
and I know that you've done something similar with the whole Irish model. Right. And what we're saying is like, look, we're not trying to come across as smart Alex.
No,
we're trying to be somebody with solutions. Right. And we're willing to talk to anybody. Anybody wants to come on the show and debate anything we're saying or telling us we're talking a lot of nonsense. Here's an empty chair. Right, come and fill it every single week. MD for the government, MD for the civil service, MD, any commentators, economic commentators, and anybody at all that thinks they can help. And we don't think this is all the answers, right? But what we're saying is if anybody else is on the same page as us where they want Scotland to flourish, right, come and talk to us.
So I think I'm at pains, Willie, to say I don't have all the answers. Of course I don't. But I think we have defined some of the challenges for Scotland. And I'm with you that if we don't have a bold, executed vision for Scotland, in 20 years, we're going to be bust.
Yes.
I honestly believe that.
Yeah.
That's why I do these things. I am worried about my country. And what we're saying this morning to everybody, and it's great you allowed Go Rural Business for the platform for business to be talked about in a positive way, is that regardless of politics, and you and I speak to people all the time around Scotland, people are worried in the business community about where are we going? How are we going to pay for things? It can't just be another tax increase on business. It can't, because there's been such disquiet in business. I've never saw it so people so angry about it, Willie.
And I think to the listeners and the viewers that if you believe in what we're saying, get in touch. Right, let us know what you think so we can take that to government ministers when we're talking to people and say, this isn't just not a rant for Hunter and Haughey. This is what the people are thinking. And I know, I've spoke to people who are in that bracket we're talking about. They're not happy.
No.
So we need to do something to try and take away the pressure of the cost of living crisis and all the problems that creates thereafter. But I think that this is a great starter. And I think that absolutely this should not be put in a drawer and forgotten about, maybe the way that the Irish paper was. But I'll tell you right now, see if they don't, the people shouldn't forgive them. Right? So what you need to think about now is when you're going to vote for people, if people are not listening to you and they're not making the changes that you would like to see to make your life better, that's what they're supposed to be doing, then it's time to think about what we do about it. And I think that now we've got something tangible we can get our teeth into. There's many, many things in this that we could look at. There's ideas for it. There's a big election coming next year. So hopefully maybe all the political parties may pick up in some of the things we're saying here and might actually have it in their manifesto. But what we both agree on, and most people should agree on once they get all the facts, is we absolutely need something like Enlightenment 2 to put Scotland back on a sure footing.
We do. And the whole point of doing this report is to stimulate that debate. We are defining the issues today and where we are, but I'm optimistic. This can be fixed. You know, leadership took Ireland from a poverty-stricken nation to a nation with a €30 billion surplus. Leadership took Singapore, 1966, from a very difficult, poverty-laden country again to one of the highest GDPs in the world. This can be done. Scotland can do it. But what we need is leadership and then execution. It's like anything we tell our businesses. You can have a great idea. If you don't execute it, it just stays as an idea. And what Willie and I are saying this morning is we are open to help MD of any political persuasion to come. We will come next week. We will come and try and help with the housing next week. Willie understands this stuff. I'm willing to put the hard graft in to try and help here. We're not just having a moans for moan's sake. We're worried, but we want to come up with solutions, and we want emboldened leadership to let Scotland flourish.
Let me finish on this, mentioning Ireland. Take a leaf out the Irish book. Never mind the rules. They didn't care about the EU rules about tax, right? So let's get back to what we said last week. Let's get back to being Scotland the Brave.
The Go Radio Business Show with Hunter and Haughey. Hit subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and never miss an episode.
Tom, we've been waiting years and years and years to get old pal of ours on the show. Delighted they've got Willie Watt, the chairman of the Scottish National Investment Bank. Welcome, Willie.
Thank you. Good to be here.
And hello, Willie. And we start this programme with Stephen Boyle, the Auditor General of Scotland, singing your praises. And he doesn't sing everybody's praises,
No,
Stephen.
no.
So a well-run bank, good for Scottish economy. So you must be pleased with that endorsement.
Yeah, no, we are pleased. It's not, they come in and do quite a detailed job. So they spent a lot of time with our team, and they're quite critical, as you say. So to get that report was really good. And it was also good that they focused on our drive to become a perpetual institution. Because I think they've kind of hit on a real strategic challenge for the bank, which is how do we stop being funded on a kind of year by year basis.
And just for our viewers and listeners today, just so they get this, you are not financed like a normal bank. You get some outside capital, but the capital you get from government has got to be used in a financial year. Is that right? Or you lose it? I don't.
That was the original way it was set up. It makes it very difficult for us to manage our capital, and the little flexibility we've got is very welcome, but it's not enough.
Right.
And the other challenge we've got is we want to be able to, if we have profits and return cash flow, we want to be able to reinvest that so we can become a proper investment institution that grows through time. And also, if we have losses, we can write those losses off against our own balance sheet.
Yes.
Whereas at the moment, those losses get written off by the Scottish government, but they take the profits,
So
if there are any.
So why would MD not want to do that, really?
It's tied up in the fiscal rules of both the Scottish government and the UK government.
Right.
And all of government pretty much thinks in these kind of annual blocks.
Yes.
So you'll have read, and lots of commentators have said, we should have long-term fiscal planning, not just for development banks like us, but for the whole public sector, which I think would be a good idea. But the Treasury rules and the Scottish government's own fiscal rules constrain what we can do.
Right.
The Treasury has written a paper about changing those rules for the National Wealth Fund and for the British Business Bank.
Right.
And we believe that change in rules should also apply to the Scottish National Investment Bank.
Yeah.
And
I hope so.
Yeah, we're trying to have that conversation with the Treasury and with the Scottish Government, because we think the Scottish Government could do more too to give us flexibility. So it's an issue. It's a complex issue,
Right.
but it's one that we think if the two governments work effectively together, we can deliver more from the bank.
So talking about delivering, Willie, for the viewers and the listeners, would you like to explain to them the reason for SNIB being set up and what your purpose is?
I mean, we were set up by an Act of Parliament which had cross-party support from all the parties, and it's really about using commercial finance to try and tackle long-standing problems within our country. Productivity, Tom, you talked a lot about the need for productivity growth. We don't have enough scale-up businesses. We're not creating enough businesses of the future. Inequality, we've got a lot of poverty in the country, and a lot of it's concentrated geographically. And that's why we've got an interest in housing, because we think that housing is a way to kind of tackle poverty.
Hallelujah. Hallelujah.
You know, And the third one is net zero, which is one of the biggest industrial opportunities that Scotland's had since the Industrial Revolution. But obviously it's necessary for the planet. So those three areas are the three areas that were set for us by the Scottish Parliament when we were set up. And what we've tried to do over the first 4 years of the bank's existence is to interpret what we should be doing in those three spaces.
Yeah.
Right.
And some of the investments that you've, you know, give us a kind of couple of examples of the sort of things that you would put money towards.
Yeah. So in the inequality space, we invest in a company called Thriving, which provides affordable housing. I think we've financed 750 units of affordable housing aimed at people that can't afford mortgages but work in critical roles, NHS, hospitality,
right,
and need to be reasonably close to their work. So we've worked with Thriving in Edinburgh and Glasgow. So that's an example, and that's all at discounted rents. So a really important area. On the innovation space, we've invested in a company called Utopia, which has created software for building management that allows tenants and owners of multi-use businesses to manage their heating more effectively. Basically, it's a SaaS software company with global investment firms as its key clients. And on the net zero space, we've invested in the port of Ardeshir,
yes,
which could strategically be the centre of the offshore wind manufacturing and construction for the next sort of 20 or 30 years.
It's a big strategic
project. Exactly. Big strategic project. We put in nearly 50 million into that. We brought the National Wealth Fund into it, and there was 350 million of private sector capital.
Wow.
But all these things are the affordable housing is relatively low risk.
Yeah.
There are barriers to how much affordable housing you can do, but it's not to do with the risk return profile. Ironically, it's to do with structural barriers. But the net zero investments, they are risky, you know, because we need certainty of government policy, which is wobbling a little bit, and we need grid investment, which we now are seeing. There's massive investment, Scottish Power, massive investment in grid, and we're starting to invest in grid. And in the innovation space, you know, there's quite a lot of capital available for early stage businesses through the angel networks and things like that. But when it comes to scale up, we think there is a requirement for more capital. And we want to work with private sector providers in that kind of journey. And, you know, as we talked about before, it's not just about finance, it's also about skills and ambition. And we want to try and foster skills and ambition as well as provide scale-up finance.
Well, in your experience, way back, you know, 3 Eyes, Martin Curry, all of that, you know, about investment, you know, about inward investment. We've been saying for weeks and weeks that we believe that if we could somehow get green status in relation to tax for investment, do you believe that this would be something that would attract much more money to Scotland?
Yeah, it would, because it would indicate to the private sector internationally that we were kind of serious and we were open for business.
Yeah.
Because what international investors want is to know that there's an open door and that they're encouraged.
Yeah.
Because a lot of these projects, they can't go anywhere, but they could be in Denmark.
Yeah.
You know, they could be in Germany, they could be in Norway.
Yeah.
They don't have to be in Scotland.
No.
So we are competing internationally, and I think indicating more more appetite to take a bit more risk would be a positive thing.
Being part of the government, the funding vehicle, one of the big complaints we get now is about the time it takes for planning.
Yeah.
And you mentioned Ardusir, and we've had the people on here, the main
Yeah,
developers,
they're
right,
really
and
good.
singing the praises of SNIB. Like we've had about 3 or 4 guys on as guests singing the praise. I think you've been bugging people, but I think that do you think that the government are looking at this seriously? Where the complaints that have you seen this week that I think it was the Norwegians pulled out of a big investment in England and in Yorkshire. Do you think that we can do a lot more in relation to the time it takes to get planning?
Yes, I do, and I think there's a planning bill going to go through in England, and I think we in Scotland have got to look really carefully at what's in that bill,
Right?
Because if that bill leads to England becoming more competitive from a planning perspective, faster, cheaper, then if we don't do something similar in Scotland, then I think we risk going backwards in terms of that.
This is what I don't get. Why doesn't the leadership of Scotland say, we want to be the fastest? We want to be, England's not the gold standard for this. In our Singapore report, to get a warehouse built, 35 days in Singapore.
Planning,
5 times that the time in Scotland.
If you're lucky.
If you're lucky. So why doesn't someone at the top say, we want Scotland to be open for this, we want them to be, and let's do it tomorrow?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm asking you a political question, which isn't fair.
Yeah.
So let me ask you a different question. So you're exposed to a lot of scale-up businesses, and we're very grateful for your sponsorship for Scale Up Scotland.
Yeah.
That's not why I like you, by the way. And our conference that we held at Gleneagles every year. But what's perhaps the most surprising thing that's struck you about the scale-up businesses in Scotland?
Gosh, that's a really good question. How positive and can-do they are. They don't rely on changes in government policy. They don't rely on, they just get on with it. And when we're talking about some pretty intractable problems that are really important, I think they just get on with it. And that's refreshing.
Yeah.
It's interesting how many people have been attracted to Scotland who were not actually Scottish, who are running these scale-up businesses.
It's amazed me. Yeah.
And I think sometimes we forget that the UK and Scotland has a lot of positive strengths.
Yeah.
In terms of the rule of law, our education system, but a lot of them came as postgrad students and then actually liked it here and stayed. So in a way, I think that has surprised me. But I'd like to go back to what you were saying about the planning system, because I think I can say something there without being political.
Okay. Yeah.
And I think part of the problem is that there's an interlocking mesh of organisations that have got a stake in planning. Organisations to do with the natural environment, with engineering, with different, and all of those stakeholders have got a statutory role to play. And that slows everything down. I'm not suggesting we should chuck all that stuff out, but it's all got to be integrated in a way. And in Portugal, for example, they have to speed up net zero. They have effectively a presumption towards development, whereas I think what we have here is a presumption against development.
Yeah.
And the country needs growth. You've said, the best piece of social policy is a well-paid job.
Yeah.
It's absolutely right. We need more well-paid jobs. We need more growth. And we need the whole system to be slightly turned such that growth is at the center of everything that we're doing. And I think the political leaders, the Deputy First Minister and the First Minister and the leaders of the other main parties, they would all agree with that if you had a conversation with them. But we need to find a way to make that happen, and I don't think we've found it so far.
Right.
In the short time, the existence of SNIB, well, and there seems to be a lot of good wins. If you had a magic wand, what would you, now knowing what you know and the way that SNIB was set up, would you change anything? Would you increase the scope of the bank, or is there more that you believe you can do where your hands are tied? Well, we've already discussed about the having to hand the money back each year, whatever. Is there anything else?
It's a really good question. I think it's important that the bank manages third-party capital for the private sector, because that would then give us a benchmark that would A, allow us to invest more, but B, would essentially give the organization more autonomy to become more catalytic within the Scottish economy. So we could take sectors like net zero or like housing and say, right, okay, in how many different ways could we intervene here that could potentially change things? So that for me is important, and that's not easy. We're a development bank. We take more risk than the private sector. We haven't had many failures so far, but we will have failures. And because it's public capital, there'll be a lot of scrutiny of those failures. And that we know that, but it is our job to invest in risky propositions. And so we need a way to balance that with how we can then raise third-party capital, which might have a somewhat different risk-reward profile, but would be complementary to what we're doing with the government capital.
So Willie, one of the things I'm really keen is when businesses are saying, "Oh, there's no capital about," and I went there and they didn't do it, is I'm really keen that the business understands what it needs and it goes to the people who do that. So maybe you could just explain what type of businesses Scottish National Investment Bank's looking for, and how they need to be investor ready. It's something that you come and speak about. Just so that you don't get a flood of inquiries and they go, "Oh, we never get a reply, we didn't do it." SNIB isn't for everybody.
No, I mean, I think for every investment we make, we turn down about 200 or 300.
Wow.
And we've invested £800 million over 4 years. So it's not like.
So there's your camera. So there's your audience.
It's not like we're not doing that. But in answer to your question, we're looking for companies in that scale up phase. So they've got revenue. So revenues, a proven business model, a management team that covers key functions, technology that's well developed but has a lot of potential, in sectors where you can be successful as a scale up. So disrupting existing players, sectors where there's a lot of change, so that a new entrant can grow and be successful. We're looking for companies with key intellectual capital. It doesn't have to be patents and things like that, but they need to be doing something that's different. So those would be some of the key criteria. On the investor ready point, it's a really good, if you're running a business that's not cash generative, then the ability to raise capital becomes a core skill of your business. And it's not something you can just do in your kind of spare time. It's a really important skill. So you need to learn that skill, like you need to learn a lot of other skills. If you've got a cash positive business model, or you can turn your business model into one that is cash positive, then you've got to do that, and that's a big positive. But if you're not cash positive, then you really need to think clearly about that. So proper business plans, realistic plans. I mean, we've all seen people that they'll send you a plan and it's stratospheric.
It goes like this.
And you say, well, how many people do you have to recruit to do that? Oh, we'd have to recruit 1,500 people to do that. Well, how are you going to do that? Oh, well, we'll hire some guy. Well, what rate do you think you could recruit at that you would? And when you just start to gently prod it, it sort of, it disappears. So be realistic in your plan and make it robust.
And what's your sweet spot for how much you would invest?
Our sweet spot is between, in that scale up space, a first investment of between 2 and 10 million.
Right. And then follow on.
And then exactly. But the follow-ons are important because that can sometimes be where companies fall down. And what we ideally want to do is invest alongside partners.
Yeah.
So be the foundational investor, like the first person to commit.
Yeah.
Or we've got 3 investors, but the whole thing won't work unless you come on board.
Right.
So to complete the round. So foundational or completing the round.
Right. So in the last minute we only got you here to put you right on the spot.
Oh dear.
Right. So we've known you for decades. And through the last couple of years, I've got to know you, David, your team, and always found you very good to deal with, very progressive. We've made the point about the government has a huge problem in housing.
Yeah.
Do you think SNIB can help the government with this problem?
Yes.
Yes.
We're going to finish on that very positive.
Willie, get your business plan in to SNIB.
He already has.
Right. Willie, thanks very much for coming on the show. It's been a pleasure having you. And I say, I can't believe you've not been on before.
Well, I've enjoyed it.
Well done for what you do for Scottish businesses.
It's very kind
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Willie, thank you.
Thank you.
Well done.
Thanks very much.
Tom, I think this show might go down in history. I think they'll be talking about this in decades to come. But brilliant. We've had 40 minutes talking about Singapore, talking about the problems, talking about the housing problem. We've spent the last 20 minutes talking to Willie all about SNIB and what they can bring. I think that this will be one of the best shows we've ever made.
Well, I hope so, Willie, because all we ever want to do in the Go Radio Business Show is to help people grow their businesses, to give them some nuggets, to introduce people like Scottish National Investment Bank. And really what we want to see, Willie, you and I are proud Scots. Willie's a proud Scot. All we'd really want is to see Scotland flourish. And we think we're at a pivotal time in our history, and we can go one of 2 ways. We want to go with bold leadership, a big plan and execution, and let Scotland flourish.
Time for Enlightenment 2 and really Scotland the brave.
The Go Radio Business Show with Hunter and Haughey. Hit subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and never miss an episode.